Welcome to Conversation. Our guest today, for the first of a two-part chat, is Charles Jordan, Executive Director of American Opera Projects. Conversations is Lehman College's series of discussions with major theater and musical figures of our time. Welcome to Conversations, Charles.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad we started our show with This Is the Real Speaking in the opera version by Lee Hoybee of the Lanford Wilson play, with the libretto by Mark Schulgasser. I feel like I have a proprietary interest in the play because Lanford is a close friend of mine and is partly responsible for my becoming a playwright and librettist. And we go way back to the Cafe Chino days. And This Is the Real Speaking might even have been written in my apartment. I don't know, it's been so long. And when I saw the piece for the first time the other night up at Symphony Space, I said, that is why we need your organization, American Opera Projects, because wasn't that the premiere of the piece?
Yeah, we are able to call that the world premiere. Lee had actually written the piece after he saw the work, I think in the 90s, but he hadn't finished it. It had just been a sketch, and we have a long association with Lee Hoybee. This is actually the 5th project we've done with Lee, and so the genesis of this whole project was sitting backstage one night at another theater with Laura Kaminsky, and she said, we're trying to do Lee Hoybee's The Tempest with the Purchase Opera College, and we don't have enough money to do it even if we had the cast because it's just too hard. And I said, well, we've been dying to do Lee Hoybee's This Is the Real Speaking. It's not had a premiere. What if we help you raise the money and we'll do it as a big extravaganza, both pieces in the same day, and audience will have a big dinner during intermission, and it'll be kind of like Glyndebourne at Purchase, New York. And that's the way we did it 2 weeks ago.
Now that is a shocking thing, that The Tempest, which is a distinguished opera, and This Is the Real Speaking, another distinguished opera, would have to wait so long for premieres.
It's a strange phenomenon. I mean, Lee is one of these people that just composes and puts it on the shelf. He doesn't necessarily have a commission, and he doesn't necessarily have a producer, and you have to kind of rattle him to say, you know, Lee, what do you have that nobody's heard? Because everything he writes is so fabulous, in my opinion. And I think this piece particularly, This Is the Real Speaking, particularly meant a lot to me personally, and maybe now, you know, as a producer for the last 20 years, I can sometimes take a little bit of you know, self-indulgence, and I had actually done a reading of the play at the Circle Rep when I first came to New York. I was Keith. In the school play, you know, we did it as
Oh my God.
And I loved the play. And then when actually you said this too, and I heard several people say this, the play sings. It just, it asked for music. And so then I found out that Lee had this opera sitting on a shelf, and that's the way it happened.
What is the genesis of American Opera Projects? When did it begin?
American Opera Projects began in 1988. I was actually a board member at the time. It was one of my sort of formative years, I would say, in opera, and I was one of the founding board members. It was started by a friend and a colleague of mine named Greta Barrett-Holby. And she asked me to be on the board with about half a dozen other people. I was trying to be a stage director of opera at the time. I was assisting and doing little productions around the country, and so I could only come into New York occasionally, but when I did, there was always a board meeting and talking about American Opera Projects, and then it happened.
And now you're executive director. How long has that been?
For about 10 years, 10 or 11 years.
What is the mission of American Opera Projects?
We are in existence to commission, develop, and I underline that word, we'll come back to that probably, and present contemporary opera, new American opera. That's what we do. And we don't do really anything from anybody that's already been tried. When you bring a project to us, you have to know that we're going to meddle with it a little bit, in the sense that we want workshops, we want it to be seen before it's finished in front of an audience so you can get feedback. It's very much the New York model, in my mind, of developmental readings and then previews for theater.
As we've done for the last, God knows how many years for plays.
That's right.
And now musicals as well.
And musicals, right.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was that common for opera. It's getting more common now.
No, it isn't. It wasn't common. When we did Ghosts of Versailles at the Met, John Coriano and I did it at the Met, they didn't even know they could ask for rewrites. Because after all, Puccini they never had to give Puccini rewrites, you know.
Well, wasn't the system then, like with Puccini, that the publisher sort of acted as an ability to remount things? I mean, the publisher didn't say, okay, now this is locked in, we've had our premiere, we're never going to look at it again. Ricordi used to say to Puccini, okay, you know, do you want another premiere? Do you want another edition? Do you want another version?
And they could do it all over the world.
And they could do it again and again.
In different cities. Why? What's the big deal about American opera as opposed to world opera or European opera? I mean, this is, I'm asking a devil's advocate kind of question.
I'm going to ask you to answer your own question then, because I think American opera and the people that come to us with ideas for operas, they seem to be, you know, world-class ideas. I mean, I don't really, American opera projects doesn't mean you have to be an American with an American idea necessarily. That's just our name. I mean, no more than, you know, New York City opera means you have to write an opera about New York City or be from New York City.
I see.
It's just the name. But I think there is I think the time right now, and maybe for the last 20 years since I've been in the business, is very ripe for Americans to be turning to the art form and to be understanding the art form and to be really pushing the art form very far.
Why?
I think it's part of what's in the zeitgeist right now. I mean, opera can be called performance art opera. Opera can be called, you know, video, multimedia opera, dance opera. I mean, there's the old cliche of opera is an amalgam of the arts is, I think, never more true.
Even more true now.
Than now.
Yeah. We have an example of just what you're talking about. We just happen to have an example of that. Seance on a Wet Afternoon, which was written by Stephen Schwartz. And you did that. Where was this recorded? We have a piece of that.
The clip that you have was actually recorded in our space in Brooklyn. We have a studio space near Brooklyn Academy of Music, Fort Greene, Brooklyn. And we tend to always do something in Fort Greene because I feel like that's where our anchor funding base is, and I like to do things in Brooklyn, but then we move them around into other venues as well.
Stephen Schwartz did the libretto and the music, and it's based on a novel by Mark McShann and a screenplay by Brian Forbes. Lauren Flanagan, who's going to appear in the second half of this show, is singing it, and you'll identify some of the other singers afterwards.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
So let's roll it. That, of course, is based on a novel, a screenplay based on a novel, an opera based on a screenplay based on a novel, which is not that unusual these days.
No, it's true.
That we were talking in the car coming up here how American opera has made adaptations, and actually the history of opera is full of adaptations.
Yeah.
What is, in your opinion, the difference between opera, let's say, and other forms of musical theater like music theater? Is there a big difference?
The way that a producer looks at that question, I think, is very similar to the way the actual creators look at it. If it feels right, if you're writing for voices that have been classically trained and sort of based on the standard Italian technique, if you're writing for that kind of voice, you can't give it to a theater actor to sing. You can't. So even if you're thinking, I want to do a musical, but you're writing for somebody who needs that training, then you've got to call it an opera. And I think this is what classically Stephen Schwartz said that right from the beginning. He said, first of all, this feels like an opera to me. It has the weight of an opera. It's different from my musicals Pippin or Wicked or Godspell. He said, they felt like musicals. This feels like an opera to me, and I'm writing it for voices that have that extended training and technique that is required for the vocal writing that I'm going to give it.
Now, this, of course, was done with, this is a piano vocal version of the piece.
It will be orchestrated.
It will be orchestrated.
Yeah, of course.
Is Stephen planning a full orchestration or a chamber orchestration? Do you happen to know?
He's a very theater-savvy person. I would imagine he'll have several versions. I think, you know, for the debut, he wants an opera house version, so I think it'll be a 40, 50-piece orchestra, something like that. But typically, composers also downscale the orchestras because more organizations can do it. So an opera company that doesn't have a huge pit or a big budget could also do the production eventually. But I think he's writing it for 50 pieces or something like that.
We're in the age of super titles and super titles that have brought to the fore the art of the opera libretto. How are you dealing with the new prominence of the libretto in your organization? What are you doing for the librettist, let's say?
Well, we've started, since we only deal with new material, I think it was very close to the beginning of my time at American Opera Projects. I was disappointed in the quality of the kind of libretti we were getting. And I almost hesitated to say to the team, the composer and the librettist, okay, go ahead, write your scene. Because I looked at the libretto and I was thinking, the scene is not going to be that good because the libretto is flawed. So I began doing some investigation, and there really was not a way that a librettist can improve their craft that I could find, like in schools or in postgraduate, dramatist playwright services or anything like that, weren't teaching librettists how to be librettists. So we started, in our own way, trying to solve that problem by doing readings of libretti. And
as plays? As
plays. And the number one person to object to that, if you can guess, was the composer. Because he would say, what use is it for you to read this libretto? You don't have my music, so you're not going to be able to tell what it is anyway. And there was some truth in that. So what we did, we kind of threw it all open again, and we said, all right, we're not just going to read the libretto like a play is read in a developmental workshop. We're going to make it a process, and we're going to hire actors who are very skilled in their craft, and those actors are going to come in and read this play under the direction of a director, and it's going to be the process. So the actors and the librettist and composer will be part of this whole, forum, and the actors will ask questions. The actors will give a line reading 20 different ways. The actors will ask about motivation. They'll ask about scene work, all the stuff actors are trained to do that normally you do not see that often in opera. Do you understand? You follow
Yes.
me? Like an actor has
Yes.
a different level of investigation or ways into trying to understand their roles than most opera singers. I'm not talking all opera singers because there are exceptions.
More and more opera singers are trained in very much the same way.
Hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
But I think one of the reasons opera libretti were not getting done to our satisfaction, to anybody's satisfaction, was because opera singers weren't questioning motivation or scene work. I mean, there's that famous story, Zinka Milanov, someone asked her about the plot of Il Trovatore, and she answered, "How should I know? I only sing one part." You know, I mean, that seemed very typical of a lot of singers, is they had no idea what the structure of the play is, how the different characters are supposed to relate to one another. And I think if a librettist and composer see that work being done on their piece, there will be a better product.
I thought we would show another example of your work, beautiful work, is the opera Darkling, music by Stefan Weisman, based on a poem of Anna Rabinowitz and adapted and directed by Michael Komlish. Would you roll that?
My child, there are no buses, no carriages from Brook to Ostrołęka, but you must find a way. Scout a way.
Dear God,
Dear
God,
long time no see, long time no see.
In the dead desire of then and there,
in the unclaimed country strewn with pasts,
tragedies commuted from first stops to dead ends,
Trains profane being without to being erased.
Barbers strop razors,
The honed tracks agloom.
erasures of hair,
The surfeit flesh.
dossiers begging escape to the grave.
Today father died of these privations.
Particles of data unable to testify.
how can we tell of our sufferings, our wanderings?
mossy maneuvers, half-taught, half-lived lives.
Worms fuss with our bones.
Is it re-entry they are after? Is it markers for their graves? Is it to remind us they burned with the best possible light? Or is it to urge us to complete them?
As they were, in great, strong masses.
Buttons are lost, but clothing remains. Clothing is lost, but figures remain. Figures are lost, but shadows remain. Shadows are lost, but the picture remains, and that night cannot efface.
After their fact, after their thought, after their flesh.
What an extraordinary work.
That's a good example of, you ask about super titles. That, I'm trying to get designers to think about super titling their works right from the beginning of the design process. So
How
it's not a
interesting.
little screen hanging above the stage or even in the back of the seat in front of you, but it's part of the process of designing so that projections can be woven into the whole visual that the
Into
audience
the
is.
scene itself.
Yeah.
That's an extraordinary idea. Now, who was that singing the central role there?
There's several characters that are voiceovers,
Right.
so we had them off, stage in a booth speaking while there was a quartet of singers on stage.
Now, you toured that in that piece in America, Germany, and Poland.
Yes,
Is that correct?
yes. That was a meditation on a Holocaust, sort of a memoir from a Holocaust survivor, child of Holocaust survivors, rather. And it was just fortuitous for us that Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation archives, which
Right.
I think he has 50,000 eyewitness accounts of the Holocaust, housed in, I think it's San Diego or Southern California. That repository was now being shared with Europe, and we were chosen to be the performing ensemble that accompanied that repository of video clips. So you could go out into the lobby and pull up somebody's eyewitness account of the Holocaust on a little video monitor, and then at 8 o'clock the curtain went up and you'd come in and see our show. It was a great performance.
What was the reaction to it?
People were absolutely stunned by the whole experience that day. I heard so many people, this was in Berlin particularly, and then we went to Poland with it, that a lot of elderly people were weeping, but they would also say, that was my story. And we were just giving them little bits and pieces of one life, but they were all saying, that was my story. It was a great night for art.
So far we've talked mainly about the composers and the librettist. I was wondering if your organization is thinking about developing a company of singers and instrumentalists. Is that interesting to you guys?
Yeah, well, I think, and you as a playwright and creator, I've heard this from other people that say, I would do better with opera if the forces on stage had a reason to make music. And I think, so that's my way of answering your question, is I like the idea of a story which involves the making of music somehow, maybe because there's an instrumental ensemble that is germane to the story, or somehow the singers are represented by instruments. I'm actually looking for a project where we can put together on stage some singers, some instrumentalists, some actors, and have them create their own piece.
I was thinking of that if AOP is trying to develop singers themselves.
Yes, that's actually a relatively new initiative of ours. We've been developing composers and librettists and serving that field for years, and we deal with the best talent we can possibly muster. But I've also found that a lot of, particularly young American singers, are coming to us and saying, we want to do this new work. How do we get involved with American opera projects? How do we get to sing new work? So just in casting about for ways to provide more outlets for all this new work we're getting, I was talking with my friend soprano Lauren Flanagan, and that's where this idea was born, where why don't we take some of these young singers who want training in opera, but also want training very specifically in new work, and see if we can create a forum for it. And she had the brilliant idea of combining with the City Company. Are you familiar with that resident theater group?
Right.
In the city, Anne Bogart?
Anne Bogart's
City Company. We had done one project with Anne and City Company people about 5 years ago. So I knew that their training for actors was extraordinary. And so Lauren thought, this is the time where we can see if opera singers can take advantage of the same type of training that Anne is giving actors.
Hold that thought, because this is a wonderful segue to our part 2, where we will meet Lauren Flanagan. I'm sorry to say that the time has passed very quickly. I wanted to thank you and our studio and home audiences for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon for part 2 of my conversation with Charles Jardin.
Thanks.
Thank you.